When the US abandoned the gold standard, the world expected the dollar to collapse. But instead, it became stronger than ever. How? The answer lies in one secret deal: oil for dollars. A deal so powerful, it turned America's currency into the backbone of the global economy and made oil, not gold, the most valuable asset on Earth. In 1971, the US dollar was on the brink. Inflation was rising, confidence was falling, and gold reserves were drying up. The world's trust in American money was crumbling. But then, Washington made a move that rewrote financial history. A deal with Saudi Arabia would ensure that every barrel of oil sold worldwide had to be bought in US dollars. This single agreement created what we now call the Petrodollar system, a financial empire built not on metal, but on energy. It gave the United States unmatched global power, made the dollar the world's default currency, and bound the fate of oil-producing nations to America's financial stability. But every empire comes at a cost, and the petrodollar's dominance may be the reason the next global shift is already underway. By the late 1960s, the world's trust in the US dollar was crumbling. For decades, the dollar had been backed by gold, a promise that every note could be exchanged for a fixed amount of the precious metal. But mounting military spending, inflation, and a growing trade deficit strained that promise to the breaking point. Nations began demanding gold in exchange for their dollars. France and others even started withdrawing massive amounts from US reserves. The system that had anchored the global economy since World War II was under siege. Then came August 15, 1971. President Richard Nixon stepped in with a decision that stunned the world. The United States would suspend the dollar's convertibility into gold. Overnight, the global gold standard, the backbone of international trade, disappeared. Economists feared chaos. Currencies would collapse. Inflation would skyrocket. And the dollar itself seemed vulnerable. Yet, paradoxically, the US dollar didn't fall. It didn't just survive. It emerged stronger than ever. How could this be possible? The answer wasn't in gold. It was in oil. A series of secret agreements with Saudi Arabia and other oil-producing nations would soon tie the dollar to the most valuable commodity in the world. This move would create the petrodollar system, a mechanism that allowed the United States to maintain global financial dominance without gold. What looked like the end of American power was, in fact, the beginning of a new kind of financial empire, one built not on metal, but on energy, trade, and strategic influence. In the next chapter, we'll uncover how this secret deal with Saudi Arabia reshaped the global economy forever. After Nixon ended the gold standard, the United States faced a dilemma. The dollar was no longer backed by anything tangible, and the world could lose faith in its value. But Washington had a plan, one hidden from the public eye, yet destined to reshape global finance. The key was Saudi Arabia, the world's largest oil producer. The US approached the kingdom with a simple but powerful proposal. All oil sold on global markets would be priced in US dollars. In return, the United States promised military protection, political support, and favorable arms deals. This agreement didn't just stabilize the dollar, it guaranteed that every nation buying oil would need dollars, creating a constant global demand for US currency. The genius of the deal was its simplicity. Oil is the lifeblood of modern economies. Transportation, industry, energy, everything depends on it. By tying the dollar to oil, the US ensured that the world had no choice but to hold and use dollars. This arrangement, later known as the petrodollar system, effectively gave the United States a hidden superpower, the ability to influence global trade, finance, and even politics through the currency itself. But the deal came with consequences. It tied the global economy to US monetary policy. Any fluctuations in American inflation, interest rates, or fiscal policy now reverberated worldwide. Countries dependent on oil had to align their economic decisions with Washington's choices, whether they liked it or not. What began as a quiet, behind-closed-doors agreement would soon ripple across continents, creating a financial empire far more influential than any army. In the next chapter, we'll explore how the petrodollar system actually works, and how it gave the United States unprecedented control over global trade. Once the deal with Saudi Arabia was in place, the world entered a new financial era. Every barrel of oil sold internationally now required US dollars. Nations couldn't buy energy with their own currency. They needed dollars, and that created constant global demand for American money. This was the birth of the petrodollar system, a clever mechanism that linked the dollar, energy, and global trade in an invisible web of power. The United States didn't just stabilize its currency, it exported its financial influence worldwide. Every transaction, every shipment of oil reinforced the dollar's dominance. Foreign nations needed dollars for oil, so they had to earn or buy them. This meant running trade surpluses with the US, investing in American debt, or keeping vast dollar reserves. In essence, the world became financially tethered to the United States, whether it realized it or not. By controlling the currency of global energy, the US could project power without armies, wars, or treaties. The dollar became a tool of influence. Sanctions, trade policies, and economic pressure could now move entire nations without firing a single shot. The petrodollar system also fueled domestic growth. Cheap global borrowing, massive foreign reserves, and steady demand for the dollar allowed the United States to maintain economic expansion, even when its own industries faced competition. Yet, as with any empire, dependence has a cost. Tying the world's economy to one currency and one nation would eventually create vulnerabilities. Cracks that rivals like China and Russia would later try to exploit. In the next chapter, we'll examine how the United States leveraged this system to gain global control, and why it became the most powerful financial engine in modern history. With the petrodollar system in motion, the United States discovered something extraordinary. It could print influence. Every country needed oil, and every barrel of oil required dollars. That meant nations had to earn, borrow, or buy US currency just to keep their economies running. This gave Washington a financial advantage unlike any empire in history. By issuing debt in its own currency, the US could fund wars, expand its military, and invest globally, all while the rest of the world helped sustain its system. Foreign governments and central banks began buying US Treasury bonds, effectively financing American spending in exchange for stability and access to oil. The dollar became more than money. It became a global operating system. If you wanted energy, trade access, or financial stability, you played by America's monetary rules. This power went beyond economics. Through sanctions, trade agreements, and the influence of institutions like the IMF and World Bank, the United States could reward allies and punish adversaries without ever leaving the negotiation table. But absolute power comes with silent risks. The same system that allowed the US to dominate global trade also encouraged massive debt and over-reliance on a single currency. And while it kept America rich and influential, it planted the seeds for resentment from nations eager to escape its control. In the next chapter, we'll explore who benefited and who suffered under the petrodollar system, and why some countries began searching for a way out. The petrodollar system didn't just change how money moved, it changed who held the power. For the United States, it was the ultimate victory. Global demand for oil meant constant demand for dollars. This allowed the US to run massive deficits, fund foreign wars, and maintain its standard of living, all while the world financed it. The phrase exorbitant privilege became reality. America could print money, and everyone else had to earn it. Oil-producing nations like Saudi Arabia also won big. Flush with dollar revenue, they invested billions into infrastructure, global markets, and Western assets. In return, the US provided military protection and access to its technology, a deal that kept both sides powerful and rich. But for much of the developing world, the petrodollar era came with pain. When oil prices surged in the 1970s and 80s, poorer nations were forced to borrow dollars at high interest rates just to buy energy. Many plunged into debt crises, chained to the same financial system that enriched others. Even Europe and Japan, economic giants in their own right, found themselves dependent on dollar flows for trade and energy security. Their economies thrived, but under an invisible ceiling controlled by Washington. This global hierarchy wasn't created by conquest or colonization, but by monetary design. The US didn't just sell goods, it sold the world its currency. But every empire faces challenges. And by the 21st century, new powers like China and Russia began to question why oil, and the world's wealth, should still revolve around the US dollar. In the next chapter, we'll uncover how the cracks in the petrodollar system began to appear, and who's trying to bring it down. For decades, the petrodollar system seemed untouchable. The dollar ruled every transaction, every trade, every barrel of oil. But beneath the surface, pressure was building, and the cracks were starting to show. By the early 2000s, countries like China, Russia, and Iran began quietly questioning why the world's most vital resource had to be sold in US dollars. They saw the petrodollar not as a fair system, but as a tool of American control. Every sanction, every trade restriction, every dollar-dependent loan reminded them that Washington's power wasn't just military or political, it was monetary. And for nations outside the American orbit, that became intolerable. Russia began signing energy deals in rubles and euros, bypassing the dollar entirely. China launched the Petroyuan, offering oil producers the chance to sell in Chinese currency backed by gold. Even US allies began exploring alternative payment systems to reduce their dependence on the dollar. Meanwhile, inside America, the costs of maintaining global dominance were rising. Wars, debt, and financial crises eroded trust in the dollar's stability. The 2008 meltdown shook confidence in US leadership, and the petrodollar system no longer looked invincible. The dollar still reigns supreme, but for the first time in 50 years, its foundation is being challenged. What began as a clever strategy in the 1970s is now facing competition from emerging economies, digital currencies, and shifting alliances. The world is changing, and so is the power behind money itself. In the final chapter, we'll uncover what the decline of the petrodollar could mean for the future of global finance, and for every nation that built its wealth on it. The petrodollar system was never meant to last forever. It was a product of its time, forged in oil, diplomacy, and necessity. But the world it created is starting to shift beneath our feet. Today, new players are challenging America's monetary throne. China is promoting the Petroyuan, tying its trade to gold and digital currency systems beyond US control. Russia sells oil to its allies without touching the dollar. And nations across Asia, Africa, and the Middle East are quietly forming a new economic order, where the dollar isn't the only game in town. Technology is accelerating the change. Central bank digital currencies, crypto assets, and AI-driven trade systems are rewriting the rules of global finance. For the first time in modern history, power might not belong to the nation that prints the world's money, but to the one that controls its networks. Still, history shows us something vital. Every financial empire believes it's eternal, until it's not. The Roman denarius, the British pound, and maybe one day the US dollar. The petrodollar built a world of wealth, war, and dependence. But as the system begins to fracture, a new question emerges. What comes after the dollar? If you've enjoyed uncovering this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow us as we reveal the next chapter in Financial History Uncovered. Because history doesn't just repeat, it compounds.